Let's welcome in the rest of the Powerhouse panel. Joining Allison and me, commentary editor for the Washington Times, Kelly Sadler, also a Newsmax contributor and Project 21 National Advisory Board member and principal of Redtail Strategies, Christopher Arps, back with us. Kelly, I want to play you a soundbite. This is Joy Reid over there on MSNBC. And she said something I thought was fascinating yesterday, maybe a glimpse into how the left has never been the party that follows the science, because they don't want the crazies, quote unquote, to win. Take a listen.
I mean, that said, did announcing the end of the mask mandate literally in the middle of the flight kind of let those a-holes win?
It's not just that, Joy. It's that in the middle of the flight, people took off with one set of rules and landed with another. And the crews, once again, on the front lines are left holding the bag to deal with this.
Just a quick note, if there is a COVID case traced back to a flight, if there was a super spreader event on a Delta flight or a Southwest flight or a JetBlue flight, I would like to know about it. So far, nothing after this. Yeah. After people got to take the masks off. But Kelly, what do you make of that? She called, I guess, people that were for taking masks off on planes. She used a strong word. She called them, as you just heard, a-holes.
No, a-holes. And this is the network that Jen Psaki is going to join here in the next few months.
Her ratings, by the way, are going to be Chris Wallace 2.0. You wait and see. You wait and see.
But I mean, this is just how radical and partisan the Democrats are, especially on the far left. And my note to Joy is this mandate was going to come down at some point, and no one knew when it was going to come down. And of course, there's flights in the air. There's flights in the air all the time. It was bound to happen. And what it says to me is the captains and the flight attendants were so excited to hear the news that they made these announcements mid-flights. And we've seen the videos of passengers clapping and taking off their masks. This is not an issue I think the Democrats want to stick to. The majority of people out there that live their everyday lives, like you were saying and Allison was saying, we don't think of COVID anymore. There are subvariants that are less contagious, that are less, that lead to less hospitalizations. The CDC itself said that we're not going to count cases anymore. We're going to count hospitalizations, and hospitalizations are way down. It's by far time that we put these masks aside and this debate ends.
Yeah, and I do get that people are immunocompromised that should be allowed to live their lives. I get that. However, and this, Allison, you were just mentioning this to me off air, but they were immunocompromised before we ever had to deal with COVID-19. So if they are immunocompromised, this is something they've been living with and dealing with on a daily basis well before we ever heard of COVID-19.
Absolutely. There's a lot more diseases that are more dangerous than COVID-19. And to Kelly's point, so this was supposed to end May. Florida, who made the decision.
Female and attractive and white. What if this judge what if it was a guy? 35-year-old guy that did it down there. That was an Obama appointee. What if, Chris, if it were a black man? What if it were, I guarantee we wouldn't see the criticism of this judge, who, by the way, is just, you read the language in her 59-page ruling, and she says, basically, citing a 1944 law that we put in place during World War II, basically that the CDC has overstepped their bounds in doing something like this. I want to get the exact language right. It's the Public Health Services Act of 1944, which, by the way, here's the language from that 1944 order. It authorizes regulations to prevent the interstate spread of communicable diseases. My goodness, that sounds like something we could apply to the southern border, too, couldn't we? Even though it says states, I'm sure we could apply that to the border. Sorry, Chris, go ahead.
You know, Democrats have zero credibility with me when it comes to science, when you can tell me that a biological male can become a female. And when we talked about the administration having different positions on masks, if you remember, the president made one statement. Jen Psaki, you made one decision. But also that same day, Hector Becerra, the health secretary, he said that we should have masks on planes. They're just all over the map on this, Rob.
All right. I want to pivot now just for a moment. Joe Biden yesterday said that NATO is the strongest that it has ever been. Take a listen.
When I was a kid in the United States Senate in my 30s and into my 40s, I was chairman of the NATO subcommittee, the Foreign Relations Committee. Not because of me or any particular thing, but I've never seen NATO as united. And I'm confident in my view, this is Biden speaking, that I don't think that Putin counted on being able to hold us together.
Kelly, what do you make of that? It seems like the 30 NATO countries are united against Vladimir Putin right now, but Putin yesterday test firing a nuclear-capable ICBM, talk about a Cold War phrase right there, term, ICBM missile, as a clear warning to the U.S. and NATO. Putin's quote to Russian state television yesterday was, "This missile is capable of," quote, "beating Western anti-missile defense systems." We're 57 days in. To me, that's a pivot from Vladimir Putin and the Russian army.
Well, I mean, I question if NATO is as strong as it's ever been, because you have many countries within NATO that are still taking and buying Russian oil, right? And if you look at the French elections, you see that Le Pen, and if you look at the runoffs, that more than half, the majority of Frenchmen basically want to get out of NATO altogether, or want to lessen France's relationship or dependency on it. So I don't know as if NATO is as strong as it's ever been. We are united against Vladimir Putin. He is a war monster. He's committing genocide in Ukraine. But in terms of the alliance, not everyone is putting their 2% GDP into its defenses, and they're not all acting unified against the sanctions against Russia.
You know, FDR died before the end of World War II. Harry Truman, of course, took over and had to drop atomic bombs on 2 Japanese cities to end the war in the Pacific Theater. If FDR were alive today and you told him that Germany and Russia are allies, and I'm using the word ally because Germany buys 40% of their energy from Russia. Still to this day, 40% of their energy. Fine, it's warming up, so they don't need as much right now, but it's going to get cold again in the fall and next winter. And that the U.S. was no longer allies with China and Russia. China and Russia were U.S. allies during World War II. They were allies. Now they are adversaries. Gordon Chang said China's our biggest enemy. I think you can put Russia up there, too. Chris, what do you make of that, and what's changed over the last 75 years?
Well, I think, during World War II, we had a common interest to defeat a madman, Adolf Hitler, to stop him from taking over the world. But of course, after the war, the Chinese and Soviets became communists, and we became free market. And so I think that's where our interests diverge. And that's why we have what we have today, a restarting almost of the Cold War.
I want to go live. My producers are just telling us that we have a live shot of these buses arriving from the southern border in Washington, D.C. Kelly, you're there in Washington. We're going to check in with Kilmeny in just a moment. I thought this was funny, but they are trying to get as close to the Capitol as possible. If they can't get to the Capitol, they want to make sure that particularly Democratic members of the House and Senate are aware of their arrival. Quickly, Kelly, your reaction to that, then we'll check in with Kilmeny.
I think this is a brilliant move on Governor Abbott's part. It's bringing attention to the crisis. The lawmakers here in Washington, D.C. are so isolated. I mean, they were behind their own fence here for several months. They don't know what's going on in these border states. And so as much awareness that can be brought to them in their backyard, the more the better. Yeah,
and part of me feels bad for the people, these immigrants that are on board these buses. They are. I mean, this is it's political theater, but they're volunteering.